In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Lab Store Application Data with Azure Blob Storage. The idea with this lab is that we're going to create an application, and using that application, we're going to store some data in Azure storage, specifically blob type data into a storage account in Azure for blobs. See, it talks about in this module, you will organize your data into blobs, create storage resources to hold blobs, and then store and retrieve blob storage. Let's go ahead and get started. Start off with the intro to blob storage. This page talks a little bit about blob storage, what it is, and why you might use it. For instance, they're talking about an example of maybe you work for a company that works with augmented reality. You want it to run everywhere, and you want it to work for everybody, and you want users to record video clips. You want them to record what they're doing and then upload it to your server so that you can then share it with other people. This is a great opportunity for blobs since blobs support binary large objects, or basically any type of object that can be described digitally, such as video files, pictures, text files, and so on. So it talks about needing a storage solution that can handle thousands of simultaneous uploads, massive amounts of data, and constantly growing files, which is kind of what blob storage is designed for, specifically blob storage in the cloud. So next page talks a little bit more about blobs, about how they work, about how they're unstructured data, and so on. A little bit more data in Azure. What happens is you create a storage account. The storage account is basically what you use to identify security permissions and who owns the data. Inside the storage account, you create a container. The container actually holds the data that the blobs live in, and then you can assign metadata such as who created it, when it was created, and other items to that blob file. Let's see, next unit, designing a storage strategy. Definitely read through this. It helps understand about how the various storage accounts work, why you might want more than one. Containers and blobs, some of the naming limitations, specifically with regards to the containers and the storage accounts themselves. Allowing public access or not to a blob storage. There are what's called virtual directories. So traditionally you are stuck simply to the storage account, container, and then blob name. However, you can create what's called virtual directories, such as this, where you can actually see like finance, budget, 2017. The great thing is, this is actually built into the name of the file that you're uploading in the blob. So the blob file name is actually finance budgets 2017 q1.xls, and it creates what's called virtual directories out of it that are then much easier for us as humans to organize through. Some information about different blob types. There's block blobs, there's append blobs, both of which are somewhat older styles of blobs. And then the page blobs we'll be using mostly when we're working in Azure. These are the types of blobs that are used for virtual hard drives. A great example of that, of you working with page blobs, is maybe you've built a virtual machine on a Hyper-V machine inside of your organization. Once you're done building that virtual machine, you can then upload it as a page blob up into a storage account in Azure and import that into an Azure virtual machine. All right, let's go ahead and let's start the exercise. So I've already got a sandbox here, and it is trying to sign into the Cloud Shell. I have actually gone ahead and opened up the Azure portal here, and I'm going to actually run the commands through here just because they're a little bit easier to read. All right, so let's see. It starts talking about storage accounts and containers. We'll skip on down to where it starts with the exercise. Basically, in this exercise, we're going to create an application that looks similar to this right here. It's going to be a fairly simple application. you're going to have a section on a web page where you can drop files. Once you've dropped them, they will then show up under the uploaded file section, and then you can actually click on these to download them. So it's a very simple uploader and downloader, but based on that scenario we were talking about earlier of needing customers to upload videos to your environment and then having people download them, that's essentially what we're talking about here. Just the end product would look a little shinier. All right, so we start off and we need to create a storage account. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and open up a notepad and then paste it in. The reason why I'm doing this is because we can see right here it asks me for a unique storage account name. One thing to talk about IT conventions or conventions in technology, oftentimes you will see this instead of with the square brackets, you will see it with less than, greater than. In this case, it's essentially the same, but what we want to do is we want to replace that whole section with a unique name. I'm going to go ahead and give it a unique name here, starting off with my initials, just simple naming convention. There we go. Nice big long name. There are a few restrictions. It has to be letters and numbers, specifically lowercase letters and numbers. If I try to put a dash in there, it will not work. All right, so let's go ahead and copy that and come in here, back to the big screen and paste it. That should go ahead and create the storage account for me. Running, great. Okay, while that's running, we then need to start working with our container. Let's see, next step. We're going to start off by talking about the software. Well, I'm actually going to zoom past that a little bit, and we'll come back to that later. I'm going to come on down to the exercise section. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to clone some data from GitHub. So I'll go ahead and copy that and paste it on in. So the clone, what we're doing is we're going out to this URL right here. It's github.com/Microsoft Docs mslearn store data in Azure.get. And let's see if I want to copy that for everything except for the .git and just go ahead and paste that into a web browser. And here we can actually see on GitHub the code. So this is the start of the code. We can actually see here's another folder. Inside there is a source folder and then start. And here is all of the code that we're talking about. The command that we did, well, just cloned it on down, just copied it down to our local computer. Not our local computer, excuse me, our Azure storage account. So the first command, clone that and downloaded it to the local computer. We then did a CD or change directory into the mslearn store data in Azure, store app data with Azure BLOB storage, source start folder. The third command is this code with a dot saying code the current location. Code is a development environment. It is a text editor that allows us to edit the files that we're looking at. Basically, on the left-hand side here, we have our file section. So we can see all the files in our environment, which should line up pretty easily with these files that we found in GitHub. In the middle here, we have our text editor. We can, in the upper right-hand corner, we have these three little dots, which we can then save or close the editor. Let's see. Okay, so we went ahead and did that. It says, go ahead and open up the controllers file controller.cs in the editor. Oops, back in the editor. So controllers, files controller.cs. We'll see how the file shows up in here. Great. Okay, specifically back to the instruction, it says there's no work to do here. We're just looking to see what it does, and it talks a little bit about the code that we're looking through. Now, I'm a systems administrator. I'm an Azure admin. I don't necessarily care what the code does. I just am following the instructions I've been given by the software development team. So I'm going to kind of skip through this. If I'm curious about how C# works and more about how the actual code works here, I could definitely read through it. All right, next step in the exercise here is to add a Nuget package. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these. So on the left-hand side here, we have our files. The right-hand side, we have our text editor. And then down here at the bottom, we actually have our command line. So I want to copy and paste those commands down here into the command line. So I'll go ahead and paste those, make sure I hit enter a couple of times while that's running. So while that's running, the very first command is a dotNet add command. If you're not super familiar with how Microsoft dotNet works, well, you don't necessarily have to. Basically, what this is doing is it's saying, hey, go ahead and add a package, add a dotNet package to my application. Specifically, it's saying the Windows Azure storage package. What this means is that there are libraries out there. There's a listing of directions that are available for computers on how to access storage in Windows Azure. And this dotNet add package command says go out to the internet, find this package or this list of instructions on how to use Windows Azure storage and download it to my local computer or download it into my application. We then run dotNet restore, which will restore the application, kind of resettle everything so that it can then see the brand new Windows Azure storage feature. Depending on your environment, that can take several minutes. Mine just happened to work pretty nicely, pretty quickly. Awesome. All right, we then continue on. Next step says go ahead and open up the models blob storage.cs. So no more controllers, models blob storage.cs, and it should look like that. It then says go ahead and use the copy the following using statements into that file. So we have 3 using statements here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And up here at the very top, I'm going to go ahead and Control V in order to paste these in. We can't right click and paste. There's no paste. But on my keyboard, if I hit Control V, it pastes it in for me. Great. All right, keep going. Let's see. Initialize is where we want to create our container if it doesn't already exist. Replace the current implementation of initialize with the following code. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Still in my blob storage.cs. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. So I've got the scroll bar over here. I'm going to look for public task initialize. Public task initialize. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this whole thing. Your screen may look a little differently. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that whole thing and delete it. And then I'm going to hit Control V to paste in the new public task initialize. You'll notice that this is all the way to the left-hand side of the screen, whereas everything before and after it is indented a bit. That doesn't necessarily matter. It doesn't change the way it works. It does kind of change the readability of the file. If I was to come back and edit this file later, that might confuse me a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click and select all of it. And then I'm going to hit Tab on my keyboard to indent it. All right, so that was the initialize task. Next. Again, this talks a little bit about how we do this in technology. I'm not really concerned at this point about how it works in C#. I'm just curious as far as how I, as a systems admin or Azure admin, will be able to do the instructions my software development team has told me to do. So I scroll down where the exercise starts, And it says, yep, we're still in blob storage.cs. We're going to replace the getNames function. All right, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to look for public async task getNames. All right, so let's go ahead. I'll go back up to the top here. Public async task getNames. Right there. Public async task getNames. I'm going to go ahead and highlight this whole thing. Again, for this, your screen probably looks significantly different than mine, but I'll go ahead and highlight it all and delete it, and then Control V to paste in. Again, we're kind of all the way to the left. I don't want it to be the left, so I'm going to scroll on up, Shift click to select it all. Yeah, and then tab a couple of times to indent it. Great. All right, next. Creating new blobs. Again, this is kind of how the technology works as far as software development is concerned. I'm going to jump on down to the exercise section. And it says, yeah, we're going to replace the save function in the blob storage.cs file. Great, so let's copy that. Let's look for the save function. I think that was up above. Right there, save. So I'll go ahead and delete all that and then paste in my code. Again, I will highlight and indent it. Keep scrolling down, then talks about changing the load function. Makes sense, we just changed the save function, we would change the load function as well. So copy that. I believe I saw that down below, so I'm scrolling down. Load. Delete and paste. Tab, tab. I think that's the last. That's the last of the editing. So when we're done, it doesn't, not sure if it really tells us to save it. So what we need to do now that we're done editing this file is we need to save it. The fact that it has this little ball right here next to where it says blob storage.cs tells me I need to save this file. So I'm going to come over to the three dots, say save. Once it's saved, that dot disappears. Great. Then I'll say close editor. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this next section and let's come back to our notepad. So this next section is doing a couple of different steps. Let me actually turn off word wrap so it's a little easier to read. First step we're going to do is we're going to create, if we read these from the right to left, we're going to create a plan or an app service plan. Now, if you remember very much about how the websites worked, what you do when you're creating a website in Azure is you create the app service, and then you've created the app. The app service is essentially a virtual machine that you are building up in Azure, and then the app is the code that you put onto that virtual machine. So we're going to create both an app service and an application. Now that does mean I need a new name. Up above here, when I first started this, I created a storage account called that with a weird name. I now need to create a name for my application. Now, in theory, if I had planned this ahead of time, my storage account will be named the same as my application. That just makes life a whole lot easier. So I'm going to take this name, I'm going to copy it. And right here where it says your unique app name, I'm going to go ahead and paste that in there. In fact, right down here, it asks for my unique app name as well. So I'm going to paste that in. And then this right here is actually asking for my storage account name. Because my storage account and my application are named exactly the same thing, I can keep the same name there. Great. So let's go ahead and copy. Come back to the portal and paste. Now that'll take a couple of minutes. Remember, the app service plan is creating a server. We're then creating an app or a website onto that server. And then we are configuring the connection string. Connection string is essentially the way that an application knows how to connect to the storage. There is a unique string, a unique set of commands that tell an application exactly how to access the storage. That command is normally a unique URL, also includes either a username and password or a unique key that allows it to have access to that storage. Once that's done, we then set some application settings for the web application. Specifically, we configure our application with our connection string. So once we've defined the connection string, we then configure our application with that connection string so that it can then access the website. And great, that finished. If I come back to my Azure portal and I look at the all resources, I will see, well, there's my app service plan. That's my server. It gave me a generic name called Blob Exercise Plan. I could have changed that. I think if I look through my instructions, right there, it named it Blob Exercise Plan. That's not super critical. The application itself, application name, is a little bit more unique. I see my storage account and I see my application. Awesome. All right, back to the instructions. We then have more CLI commands. This is going to publish our account or publish our code. So let me go ahead and copy this. I'll put it in Notepad so it's a little bit easier to read. First thing we're going to do is we're going to call dotNet to say prepare for publishing. It's going to create a publish object for us called pub. We will then change directory into that pub folder and zip up all the files. All right. Once that's done, we then do some Azure commands specifically called deployment. What are we deploying? Well, we're deploying a web application. We say, okay, the source of this is right there. And then the destination is going to be our unique app name. I need to copy my app name again. Copy. Paste. With that resource group. All right, so if I copy this and I paste it right here, that should deploy my environment. However, people sometimes have problems with this. All the editing that we just did through our code editor, I may have done a typo. And I don't necessarily want to deal with typos at this point. I could go ahead and paste that in here and confirm if it's working or not. I actually kind of want to take a step back and try it slightly differently. What I mean by that, if I go back up to GitHub, this was the folder that we downloaded. This folder. This is where we downloaded. We then went into the store app data with Azure Blob Storage, source, and start folders. Well, you'll just happen to notice there's also a final folder here. And if I go into the final folder, all of my code is there. So why don't I just go to the final instead? Instead of thinking maybe I got the source working properly, I'm going to actually go back up a couple of folders, back into the final. So cd ... You'll see I'm no longer now in start, and then cd final. Now I'm in the final folder. Now I can go ahead and do my publish. Again, I could have done this from the start. I'm doing it from the final just to make sure I didn't do any typos. It's a bit of a cheat. Yeah, this is definitely cheating, but we'll see if it works. All right, so we start off with the .NET Publish. It is creating a publishing package. This is something that Visual Studio and Microsoft.NET does for us. Basically takes all of the files, all of our CS proj files, all of our DLLs, it compiles them, makes them everything that is necessary for running on a web server. and prepares the environment for us into a pub folder. Once that pub folder is run, I may have copied and pasted the wrong content. We'll find out. Yeah, so it publishes all the content into a pub folder. We then change into that pub folder, and then we zip everything up. Create everything into one big file called site.zip. We then deploy that on out, at which point our website should be fully functional. The typo I think I have is actually in this line. I think that is wrong. The one that I copied is wrong. But we'll find out. Yes, big old red error message, typo. Let's go ahead and paste the correct text. So it's going to take the zip file that was just created by the dotNet publish command and upload it into Azure. All right, completed, yay! All right, so what that means, if I come back into Azure, I'll go ahead and refresh this just for good purpose, good measure. My app service, my web application. If I click on that, I have a URL right there that I will open up in a new tab, and I should see my website. First time you click on it, it always takes a few seconds, which is perfectly normal. And there's the website. There's my file uploader application. I can drop files into here in order to upload. Oh, let's go ahead and try that. Let's go ahead and upload a picture. And there's my picture. Let's upload a couple more pictures. Let's see, can I do multiple at the same time? Ooh, I can. All right, so we just used code in order to upload files into Azure, Azure Storage. If I click on these, it downloads. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We can, in fact, come back here to our all resources, and instead of, let's close that. Instead of looking at the website, now let's look at our storage account. If we come over here onto the left-hand side and look under blob storage, we can look into our containers, and we see a container here called files. The code that we just published created this files location. Public access level is private, but if we look into it, it then shows the files individually that we just uploaded. Now again, these files are private, so the only way to access these files is actually through our application. So even though this file, let's see if I click on it, it does have a URL here. Which, if I look at, it is a, yeah, here's the location for my blob storage. It's in the files, and then breaking Windows passwords. If I go ahead and copy and paste that, I believe I will get permission denied. Aha, so this is not a publicly accessible site, a publicly accessible file, but because my application is accessing that storage, it is available to me.